Okay, hi everybody. Thank you for being here. My name is Jennifer Galbraith, and I'm going to be presenting today on a little research project that I'm working on titled Assessing and Measuring Food Security in U.S. Affiliated Pacific Households, a Scoping Review. So in the presentation, I'll talk a little bit about my positionality with the project, go over some key concepts that we should all be on the same page about, and then go over what we know, what we don't know, and then the actual research process, and then some of the preliminary results. So for my positionality, this is clearly not Alaska, this is Hawaii, and I'm not actually from either place. I was born and raised on the East Coast in Massachusetts, and in my childhood there, a couple of my uncles were fishermen. My parents had a garden, all my grandparents gardened, and we also went out to harvest wild berries all the time as a family. And then I was in college and I met my husband, who's over there in the audience, and moved to Alaska for love after we graduated. And I became a grant writer, and I worked at Rural Cap and at the Providence Foundation, including for the facilities here on Kodiak, and then at ANTHC for the Center for Environmentally Threatened Communities. And all of this was over a decade of work. I eventually went out on my own, and I still do that today. And what I've always loved about being a grant writer, even though people often say things like, oh, that's so tedious, I hate doing that work, but I always really appreciated being invited to be at so many different special tables in the community to hear about what's happening in the community and then what people want to do to improve the quality of life for Alaskans. So when I think about the quality of life for Alaskans, I typically view it through more of a public health lens, so health promotion, disease prevention, and then really specifically, personally, in my heart, that's about food. So AFPC can literally change your life because my husband was traveling around the state, working with some tribes a couple summers ago, and I was at home sick with COVID, and he forwarded me a listserv from AFPC, and it said something along the lines of, I'm looking at Melissa back there because she knows what I'm talking about. It said something along the lines of, does no one want to spend like some time in Hawaii and get a PhD in nutritional sciences, studying Alaska and children's health and food systems? Like, come on, we need an applicant. So he forwarded me the email, and he's a man of many words sometimes and a man of few words sometimes, and it just said, you should apply. So I was sick at home with COVID. I applied, I got in, and like within 4 weeks, I was on campus in Honolulu starting a graduate program. So here are some pictures of my time spent there. I'm back and forth between the locations. And Kaiulani's in the audience too back there. So these pictures with the banana trees have some of my professors, food system leaders in the community, and my cohort peers who are from the US affiliated Pacific. And this is at Ho'oula'aina, which is a part of the efforts that Kaiulani spoke about yesterday. And here's some breadfruit at the bottom. That's my favorite Hawaiian food that I'm so grateful to eat on a regular basis, also called ulu. So this is all to say that I'm currently in my third year of a doctoral program in nutritional sciences. So my positionality for Alaska, again, I was raised on the East Coast. So I had similarities in food culture with my husband, who was raised here, but he was my gateway into everything here and being connected to the food system. So I just wanted to give thanks to him and his family. Here we have his grandmother, Molly Galbraith, in Fairbanks, and our daughter, Lyndon, hanging out with her this summer. And then Lyndon, when she was younger, picking lingonberries. She's a great harvester. And all these berries are on Molly's ancestral grounds out in the Otna-Athabascan region around Mentasta Lake. And then we have our family down in the corner. This is Lyndon trying her first piece of moose jerky. And we're checking out Faye Ewan's fish wheel on the Copper River. And then this is our garden, our little oasis of plants in Anchorage. Okay, so next for the US affiliated Pacific, I'm going to refer to it as the USAP, and the individual locations in the USAP as jurisdictions. So for the purposes of the presentation, those jurisdictions are 2 US states, Alaska and Hawaii, 3 US territories, We have American Samoa, the Mariana Islands, and Guam. And then also the freely associated states, or the FAS. And this includes Micronesia, which is Yap, Chuuk, Pohnpei, and Kosrae, the Marshall Islands, and then also the Republic of Palau. So all of these are down in the southern part of the Pacific, and then we have Alaska up top as a friendly northern neighbor. The second concept is Children's Healthy Living Center of Excellence, or CHIL Center. And CHIL has its origins at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, specifically within the College of Tropical Ag and Human Resources and the department, which is titled HENFES, which is Human Nutrition, Food and Animal Sciences, and specifically then the Nutritional Sciences program. The director of CHIL and of the Nutritional Sciences program and of the entire graduate department at UH is Dr. Rachel Novotny, and she's the PI on all of the USDA grants that the CHIL Center gets to work on child health and nutrition across the USAP. And CHIL is, in brief, a collaborative initiative across the region to improve child health and nutrition. And it's a partnership between land-grant institutions. So this includes UAF, specifically through cooperative extension. So I'm sort of like the UAF Alaska representative in a 5-person cohort, which includes then a student from Guam, a student from Hawaii, a student from American Samoa, and a student from the Mariana Islands. CHIL's foundational work started back in 2013 with a USDA grant. They put on a community randomized trial and collected data in 2013, 2015, and 2019 in all of the jurisdictions. And this included Alaska. So there were partnerships up here with community organizations and with UAF. And Fairbanks served as the intervention community. The Mat-Su region was the control. And the Kenai Peninsula and Anchorage were temporal communities, which means that data was collected from families with young children ages 2 to 8, but there weren't specifically intervention activities on the Kenai and in Anchorage. And the trial was multi-level, multi-component. It had a positive deviance approach to address target child behaviors. So what this means is that it was happening on multiple levels of the community with partners. And multi-component, there was essentially a menu of activities to choose from that the community members and the university staff thought would be best for their location. And positive deviance means that again, they thought that these would be the best things. They knew that they would work, or they had worked, or they were curious to see if they would work in their community. And then those target child behaviors that the activities focused on were increasing fruit and vegetable intake, increasing water intake, decreasing sugar-sweetened beverage intake, decreasing screen time, increasing sleep time, and decreasing or increasing physical activity. So all of the activities were focused around that. So then if you fast forward to today, CHIL has a new USDA grant through Sustainable Agriculture Systems. And the focus of the grant is to explore food system and nutrition drivers on young child health outcomes over time. So this scoping review is a little part of that. So the third key concept is food security. The USDA, I would say, is technically or generally who we look to in terms of food security research and food security tool development, such as their 10-item household food security survey module, and then the 18-item one, which is for households with children. So I wanted to frame us all up with their definition of food security, which is at the household level, access by all members at all times to enough food for an active and healthy life. And then food insecurity, on the other hand, would be the limited or uncertain availability of nutritionally adequate and safe foods, or limited or uncertain ability to acquire acceptable foods in socially acceptable ways. And so this means like not through stealing, for example. We do have other definitions of food security. I mean, there's the World Health Organization, Food and Agriculture Organization, World Food Summit definition that many people use. And then even locally in Alaska, for example, the Alaska component of the Inuit Circumpolar Council has their own definition of food security. So Chill collected data on household food security in 2013, 2015, and 2019 in all of the 4 Alaska community regions that participated in the trial. And Chill used an adapted item from one of the USDA surveys, and it was about if money runs out for food before the end of the month and how often that happens in the past 12 months. So response options included things like never on one end and then always on the other end. So those responses were then dichotomized into being food secure or food insecure as like a screener sort of for the data. And you can see here in the orange, these are all of the different variables that Chill collected data on. And then they're all connected to the blue, which are conceptual variables. And so these are like the broader topics that guide the research efforts. So you can see that food insecurity is being influenced by demographic drivers like household income, level of education, and then food security has a bidirectional relationship with child diet, and then it's also impacting health outcomes. So why food security on a household level, on the individual level? A lot of what we talk about here is in terms of agriculture and more of like the broader community, state level food security. But this presentation is about ourselves, our neighbors, our peers, the person we walk past on the street. Do they have enough food to eat? Do they have to skip meals? Are they worried that the food that they eat is going to do something bad to them, etc. So this is just a simple Google search for the term food security. And I find it so interesting. It is so colorful. It's so round. There are so many pieces that are all really perfectly connected. And I think the beauty of what we're all talking about here is that we are really passionate about a lot of the little individual pieces and are here to put our heads together to talk about like how do we make it really look like this, if this is what we feel, you know, in our hearts or we see this in our heads, how do we make that happen on the ground? So if you were to look closely, you see words like distribution, transportation, processing. And so household food security or individual level food security is going to fit in the little box that says access. So why, from a nutritional standpoint, is food insecurity and food security important? There are many reasons, and I've heard lots of them being spoken about here. But one of them that I want to point out in terms of nutritional sciences is malnutrition. So malnutrition can take place as undernutrition and also overnutrition. So undernutrition would be something like wasting or stunting or having a deficiency of a needed micronutrient, especially during a period of growth, like for children or in pregnancy. And then also as overnutrition, so with chronic disease and obesity, and also an overdose of micronutrients. Because believe it or not all nutrients are better in more and more quantities, and plenty of them have toxic upper levels that you shouldn't be going past. So one example here on this slide is sodium. You know, we all know that, I think. But another example that I think is good for Alaskans to think about is vitamin D. So there's a lot of talk about vitamin D in Alaska, and lots of people supplement it. And vitamin D has a toxic upper limit as a fat-soluble vitamin, and so you do have to be careful that you're not over-supplementing. So I wanted to ask maybe someone who's not nutritional sciences or dietetics or public health, if anyone knows what the primary function of vitamin D is in the body. Like we say, oh, I need my vitamin D. And what is that really for? Yes, it has to do with our calcium homeostasis in the body. Our calcium has to stay in a really tight range in the bloodstream. And so vitamin D is a part of that. And so it includes multiple hormones, which vitamin D is a hormone as well, and multiple organ systems, multiple body systems, the endocrine system, the intestines, the bones, etc. So going into what we know and what we don't know. So we know that the CHILL trial collected data on household food security. And again, this is in families in the different USAP jurisdictions at the community level. And again, households with children 2 to 8 years old. We also knew that from the USDA, the FNEP program, which is the Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program, also has a couple of USDA questions on their intake forms, and FNEP does exist across the USAP. But beyond this, we really weren't sure who else is consistently collecting this data about household food security. Like, how do we know that our communities have enough to eat and enough of the right food? And I'm going to give you some of the examples that don't cover everybody. So we have Feeding America. We rely a lot on Feeding America data. They have a great interactive map called Map the Meal Gap. And they actually aren't like surveying individual households. They're taking other data and estimating the prevalence of food insecurity in an area. And it also only covers Alaska and Hawaii. We also have the CDC's NHANES, which is the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. This is a federally run annual mobile exam survey, and tons of health research is conducted on this. Well, they say it's nationally representative, and in all the decades of existing, they have never visited Alaska or Hawaii. So we are not included in that data, which is part of the reason why CHIL started to operate in the first place, was at least at the child level to collect this data. There's also BRFIS, which is Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance System, and this exists across the USAP as well. But the questions first come from the feds, and food security has been included a couple of times, but that's not consistent. And then at the local level, you can add questions to your survey, but again, that's not consistent across all of the jurisdictions. We also have the US Census Bureau and the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So they put on the Current Population Survey, or the CPS, and annually in the winter, they use the USDA Household Food Security Survey module as a supplement, and they survey about 40,000 households across the country for household food security status, but again, this only includes Alaska and Hawaii. So we were also thinking about the individual jurisdictions in the USAP, and they're in a region together, but they're all also very unique. And so we knew that we might be interested in seeing if there were any geographic, cultural, environmental, historical considerations that came up in terms of what food security really means in each individual location. And we also knew that a lot of food security survey tools that exist are really about money. So again, from the USDA perspective, thinking about how much money you have for food, if your money ran out for food, how often that happened, if you had to skip meals or reduce the size or quality of a meal because you didn't have enough money. And we know as Alaskans that that might not tell the whole picture, right? So this brought us to our research question, which is, how is food security assessed and measured in USAP households? Like, what else might be out there? Are we missing anything? And we know that programmatic priorities, policy making, funding allocation, I mean, usually, I'm not sure if I can say that today, we use data to make these decisions. And so if you don't have data, do you have a seat at the table? And is your table, or is your seat at the table at the same level as somebody else's who has the data? I just wanted to share an example of the word assessed. So this would be like using a survey or a screener, and then the word measured means, how are you actually determining like the level of food security? Like, how would you turn that into a classification or a categorization? So when I say we, I'm talking about other people in the CHIL program. And so we decided, we really thought that there was a lack of data and that there was inconsistency in it. And that in terms of peer-reviewed sources, so this means papers that are published in scientific journals, that the data would be pretty limited, and that there would be a large role for gray literature, which is like local level data, government data, reports, documents, white papers. And that we also thought that there would be these nuances that would emerge because of how unique all of the jurisdictions are, and we wanted to make sure we could capture that. So we decided to conduct a scoping review. A scoping review is sort of a middle ground evidence synthesis method. And we want to confirm the fit. And so there's a more casual literature review where you don't have protocol that you're using. And then there's also a much more intensive and rigorous systematic review or meta-analyses. And so a scoping review allows you to have an a priori protocol, which means you develop all the plans, like all the rules and boundaries beforehand, and then you implement it, but you don't have like the same level of scrutiny that you do at the systematic level. So first we had to develop the protocol. This was a new method for me, so I spent a lot of time looking at published scoping review papers. There actually is one by Alaska researchers called Traditional Food Security. If anyone's interested in seeing like what a scoping review really is, we have a local one, which is a great read. And I also reviewed a lot of methodology papers on best practices for scoping reviews, and then use some of those evidence-based guidelines and templates to put the scoping review together. We also registered it on Open Science Framework, which is a nonprofit tech organization that seeks to make research reproducible and transparent. And then I also did a pretty deep dive into other protocols and other scoping reviews to make sure we weren't duplicating the work. So then we had to actually conduct the scoping review, which means searching for the potential evidence sources, screening those sources against our criteria, charting a whole bunch of data points that we were interested in, and then figuring out how to synthesize the data, how to share it out, and present those results. So in terms of the peer-reviewed literature, I worked with a reference librarian to put a search string together and use 6 different databases to pull possible evidence sources. So this included PubMed, PsycInfo, CINAHL, Agricola, Web of Science, and CABI. So we wanted like agricultural perspective and also public health and medicine perspective. And this is an example of a search string. So it's not like you just search food security, Alaska. There's a lot of different words, household level. So this is just an example of working with a librarian to put together a search string to make sure that your search is pulling all of the different types of evidence sources that you want into the results. So everything that we got from the databases, we pulled into Zotero, which is a free citation manager. And then from Zotero, it went into Catchy, which is a free systematic review software. And it identified duplicates. We had 111 duplicates across the databases. And then I individually went in to affirm that and remove them. And then myself and another professor, we screened all the titles in the abstracts to see if they met our search criteria. And anything that we agreed upon, we then took to the next step, which was full text. And so we read the full text of dozens of papers. And Catchy, or sorry, I'll go into third party. So if we disagreed on anything, we had a third party. So we had an FNEP evaluator from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, be there to go over any disagreements that we had. And then so Catchy is actually, it's really amazing and it's free. It was tracking our inter-reviewer reliability. So for statistics people, we had a Cohen's kappa of 0.83, which meant that we were in good agreement with each other. And we found that there was like one key reason why we weren't agreeing on some. And so we were able to come to resolution on that afterwards. So from 363 sources, we ended up with 18 that we thought met all of our criteria, and then we added 2 from our gray literature search. For the gray literature, we relied primarily on chill subject matter experts. And so this is a picture of some of the co-PIs that are across the USAP at all of the land-grant institutions. And at the CHILL annual meeting last summer, we had an in-person work session in Honolulu where people brainstormed who was collecting food security data in their location. I went on a literal goose chase over the months for gray literature. It was a lot harder than the peer-reviewed. And I'd like to say that I'm done, but even just as of this morning, I realized that there's another source. And then even Red talking, I'm like, oh, is there food security data in his survey? So right now we have 23 sources, and that might grow, but I'm going to share some of the preliminary results using these 23 and give you a little bit of an idea of some of the decisions that we have to make about the sources. So one of the sources for Alaska is from the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, and the Division of Subsistence Surveys. 2 minutes, okay. I guess I'll skip this, but this is one example of Alaska. And actually, the Kodiak Road System 2021 assessments came out in 2024 publications. So we're counting all of this as one source currently, but that's something that we have to figure out if we want to include the individual community technical papers as individual sources. And they actually worked with the USDA back in 2003 to incorporate wild foods as well as store-bought foods into the USDA's survey tools. So you can see that here. Do Americans have enough to eat? And do you have enough of wild and store-bought foods? Okay, I'm going to rapid fire. A couple of other places had food acquired in other ways too, and this is an example of those emerging nuances. So preliminary results overall, 43. Chill and FNEP were the only ones that were consistent across all of the USAP. 37% actively use a USDA definition of food security in the paper or document. 47% used specifically a USDA tool, but if you added in any tool that had origins with USDA and like the researcher adapted it or something like that, it was 77%. And again, this is mainly financial based, except we just saw with the Division of Subsistence, they added in the wild foods. And then 84% included children. So this could mean it was about children, households had to have children, or some households did have children. And 67% included food assistance, which means either in the target sample or in the data collection or in the analysis, food assistance was included. And then for Alaska specifically, we had 16 sources, include Alaska. Chill was one of them. And again, that was the whole USAP. 9 of them were Alaska and Hawaii. So these were other like federal surveys where we couldn't disaggregate Alaska from it. An example is the National Health Interview Survey. And Haines data did come up, but we couldn't use it because we know that Alaska and Hawaii aren't actually included. And then 6 were specific to Alaska, 3 peer-reviewed, 3 were gray literature. And for time's sake, I won't go into the details of them. But basically, this was it. And so, okay, thank you. So this was it. I don't know. I don't quite think it's enough. I don't really think it probably shows a clear picture for all of our communities if people have enough to eat and enough of the right food. And especially with what's happening in the federal arena right now, and we have food security and food assistance related funding possibly going away, I think that this is even more important to figure out. And do these questions, as we see that most of them are coming from the USDA, which is a great place to start, but does that really tell the whole picture of what food security means for people in all areas of Alaska? And should we be doing our own surveys like the Division of Subsistence with these other types of acquisition of food and other definitions of what food security means to us? Should we be including that? So I'm out of time. Oh, and only one of 6 of the Alaska-specific ones used a USDA tool, and that was FNEP. And so some had USDA origin, but then 2 of them actually just used totally different ways. So I think that's interesting too. I think all of it's really interesting. And again, we have a few more gray lit sources we need to go through. So the numbers might change and we need to make some decisions on how we count some of the sources. So for example, I gave the ADF and G, but say with FNEP or BRFIS, like these are annual surveys, so do you include BRFIS as one evidence source that does annual survey collection, or do you use BRFIS like every single year that becomes a new evidence source? So I'd just like to thank all the people I'm working on this with at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and everyone at Chill, everyone in the USAP, all the people on the ground at the land grant institutions, and USDA, which is also Chill's funder. And that's it. Thank you. And please be in touch if you have any gray lit or any questions.
Okay, folks. It's our last session before lunch. We're excited to hear now under the session of Community Food Security Solutions. This session is titled The Feast Table. developing an Indigenous research methodology process of cultivating relationality and reciprocity through sharing food.
I thought maybe I could like workshop that title before they put it up, but it's really long. But yeah, today I am presenting on the feast table. This is work that we are developing by doing. And so it's not really, doesn't have a protocol, it doesn't have steps. It's just something that we're doing and healing by doing. And so I just wanted to present a little bit about that. And I'm from Kodiak. My family's from Kodiak, and I want to come home and I want to work in Alaska again. And so I'm putting myself out there and talking with all of you as my ohana here in Kodiak and in Alaska and people working on food sovereignty. But yeah, so at the moment, I'm thinking of this as sort of an Indigenous research methodology, and I'll walk through and explain what I mean by that. But my name is Sila Cohn. I am Sugpiaq and Unangax and Sugpiaq, and I'm an Indigenous and Rural Health PhD student at Montana State University right now. And I'm also a member of the Buffalo Nation's Food System Initiative, and my advisor is Jill Falcon Raymaker, and she's really creating a space for a lot of Indigenous students to try to be Indigenous in their work, and I think that that's really important right now. So, yeah, this is our recipe, our what we're gonna hopefully get through today. I'm a little bit worried about time, so I'm gonna try not to talk too fast, but I'm gonna go through positioning myself within my community, my culture, with all of you, with this work, because that's an important thing to do when you're considering doing work in your community. And I'm also going to position the knowledge that I'm sharing. I'm going to talk a little bit about what Indigenous research is and what Indigenous science is, what Native science is, and how people are talking about that right now. And then I can really only tell some stories about what we've been doing. It's not something that I want to write out and have protocol and like guide for, because I want it to be something that communities can make relevant to what they need. It's not something that you need to write a book about. It's just something that we've been doing for a long time, and I just am reflecting on that here with you all today. And so I do have a couple of building blocks for what's worked within my beloved communities. And then I would like to, if we have time, have discussion, talk story maybe. So yeah. This is me positioning myself with all of you. So my Huinga Sila Cohn, Shunami Sushlianka, which means my name is Sila, and I was born here in Kodiak. My mother is Denise Nikiforov. My father is Aram Cohn. My mom is from Kodiak. Her dad was a fisherman here. And this is my great-grandmother, Emily Nikiforov. She is from Chignik, and my great-grandfather is from Sand Point. So ancestrally, we're Unangax and Sugpiaq, but my grandfather enrolled us in Untitled, which is, it's a long story. It's an Anksa thing, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense. And so my mom really didn't explain it to me that well growing up, and it's something that I've tried to understand as I begin my journey, like the salmon, to come home. And so I've lived everywhere but Alaska since I was 5. I've lived in Washington, I've lived in Greece, I've lived in Hawaii, which is where I consider myself to have done a lot of growing up. This is where I went to high school, this is where I went to college, and this is where I was surrounded by some of that Kanaka Maoli activist, Native Hawaiian activist spirit, where they're like surrounded by their culture and their language, and they're eating their foods, and they're, there's a lot of people doing a lot of amazing things in Hawaii, as I'm sure you heard in our talk yesterday. And so I learned a lot being there, and learned a lot about what it means to practice your culture, and what it means to go back to your heritage, what it means to do your genealogy work. This is like, they even have a word for genealogy work in Native Hawaiian. I looked it up and couldn't pronounce it, so I'm not gonna try, but I remember people saying it. And so this is something that I think about a lot, and something that has driven my work as an Indigenous student and trying to come home, trying to, you know, we've come back and fished over the summers, and like this is me at 13 and in Southeast with my uncle who's a fisherman, and this is me last summer, and there's a long time and a lot of context and a lot of things that happen in between these pictures, but there's still a big old smile on my face to be back in Alaska and to be back fishing, and so I reflected on that, and these slippers on the end here are my positionality through craft that we did for my Indigenous Research Methods course this semester. And it's just my reflection that this is basket weaving grass woven into the soles of the slippers, because last summer I went to culture camp in Anchorage for APIA, which is the Aleutian Chain region, and I learned how to basket weave. And I remember like sitting there and being crafty, and I've been knitting since I was 10. Like my great grandmother was a prolific knitter. And I just remember thinking, like, when is the last time someone in my family wove a basket? But I could still see these pieces of our culture in their actions. My grandpa was a fisherman. My mom is like the most practical person I know, which I think arises from our environment, this like practicality, like it's cold, you gotta get food, you gotta gotta do what you gotta do. And also just kind of seeing and picking out these pieces of my culture in the actions of my family and reflecting on what that means and thinking about like it lives in here, our culture. It you know, and so it's important to live it and come back to it. So knowing all of that and coming back to my heritage and wanting to think about what it means to do science and be a researcher, I've really been diving into all of the writers, Indigenous writers, who are thinking about what it means to be a researcher and a scientist, and in a way that our ancestors did it. And so I've taken some inspiration from some really beautiful authors and workers in Indigenous research and Indigenous science, like Robin Wall Kimmerer, who wrote Braiding Sweetgrass, and Gregory Kahete, who is a Tewa scholar. And they write about science in terms of our relationship with the lands and waters that we were on for millennia, shaping who we are. This is where our culture comes from. This is where all of our social structures come from. This is our values, it's our traditions, it's our protocol. Everything came from our relationship with the land over generations, and was shared generationally and through stories and art and music. And so Kahete includes all of these aspects of what life was in terms of science, and he includes like fishing and hunting and farming, things that I'm sure all of you food sovereignty people are thinking is looking a little bit familiar. And also things like spirituality and community and creativity. How do we share this knowledge? And so when I think of science, this is the science that I want to do. I don't really want to do Western science. And so that's something that I'm pushing back a little bit. And even in an Indigenous health PhD, this is not really what we study. And so I think about it and talk about it and try to take Indigenous research methods courses that aren't required for some reason. So yeah, this is the science that I would like to practice. But to do this science in a way that our ancestors would do, like, can we do it in a Western science system? I don't know. I know that we have an approach to science right now in Indigenous research. Indigenous research is kind of rebuilding what science, what research can be by approaching a paradigm, an Indigenous research paradigm. And so we're rebuilding it in terms of our ontology and admitting that our reality is not the same, even from me to you, and especially not from like my culture to another culture. We think of the world in different ways that arose from our relationship with the land and each other. And it's just, there's not one universal truth and one data set that proves something and makes you the expert. If you didn't ask an elder, are you an expert? No. So this is we're rebuilding an ontology. We're understanding reality is different. We're thinking about our epistemology. So what do you think reality is, or what is your worldview? How can this be an Indigenous epistemology, and how can that provide the foundation for our work? What is your axiology? What are the morals and ethics and protocols that you're using to do research, and why is it important that they're Indigenous? What is your methodology? How do you come to know more about reality? And who do you do it with? And a very beloved and wonderful thinker and writer about this is Sean Wilson. He wrote the book Research is Ceremony, and he talks about how do we do research in a way that's healing, because research for Indigenous peoples is a bad word. It's been done in such a terrible way because of the way that Western science thinks about knowledge. Knowledge for Western science has long been from a very positivistic approach, which means that you can go and collect data and you can measure everything until you've measured everything that you can, and then you're the expert on that subject. Whereas from an Indigenous perspective, knowledge is something that's held in relationship. Knowledge belongs to the fish, and it belongs to land, and it belongs to the sea, and it belongs to a community. It doesn't belong to an individual. And so when we're thinking of doing Indigenous science, this is something that, or Indigenous research, this is something that's being written about and thought about, is this relationality, this thinking of knowledge as something that belongs in relationship, and considering the web of connections all around us. We're all connected with others, and we're all connected with the food that we eat. Everything that we put in our body is building up and is building us and becoming, part of ourselves. And so Sean Wilson really boils down our ontology and epistemology to be this understanding of those relationships, this understanding of ourselves and our communities within this web of relationships. And he boils down axiology and methodology into this being accountable to those relationships. You need to be accountable to your community and to everyone you're working with, and it's important to allow your research to be founded in that understanding if you're working with Indigenous communities, or even, I think this is helpful for a lot of people. This is, I think, knowledge and wisdom that we can all tap into in some ways, is just understanding that relationality. And so I've been thinking a lot about what methodology is. How can I do research in a way that my ancestors would have done it? And I don't know if we're there quite yet in Indigenous research. we have like community-based participatory research, but you could still do CBPR and still do damage. It doesn't fix everything. And so an Indigenous methodology is, again, that building of more relationships and your reflexivity in that process. And it's shaped by an Indigenous epistemology. In Indigenous research, a methodology should be shaped by Indigenous epistemology or worldview. And it's according to Sean Wilson, it's how we come to know more about reality and fulfill our relational accountability. I started a PhD in Indigenous research because I wanted to know how to do this, and I didn't necessarily feel like I found a way to do it or the answers of how to do it. But thankfully, our ancestors have been doing research for a very long time, and I take a lot of inspiration from that. And I think that our food systems were the original methodology. This is where knowledge was held. And it's such a beautiful model, and it's not something we even consider in research in Western or Indigenous, really. But in my experience, you go to the first teachers first. You go to the salmon, you go to the land. And this is what my advisor's been telling me. Go home. Like, we can't teach you anything that your community and your land can't teach you better. And to hear that, honestly, has healed a lot. So I've been thinking about food systems. I've been thinking about feasting as a methodology, as a way to share knowledge and to create a common and shared ground to move forward in a good way. And Kahete writes about about our native food systems as providing a context in which all of those dimensions of native science were shaped and expressed. And he talks about feasting and celebration as creating this place for the telling of stories, for interaction, for trade, for bonding, for learning, and for giving thanks for the life, for honoring and respecting the land and the more than human relatives that are present at that feast. And that's something we also do not do in Western research, is give thanks and be reciprocal and respectful. And so I can tell some stories about what a feast table is right now at Montana State and what it means to be an Indigenous student and researcher in an environment where you can come together with other Indigenous students, non-Indigenous and Indigenous students and researchers and scholars and faculty members, and share food, to pray, to honor the lands that you're on, and to build community, build beloved community in a good way so that you can move forward. And I'm going to share a little bit about some of the beloved communities that I'm part of down at Montana State, and this includes, so about 8 months ago, I showed up on the plains without a clue, and they put me in charge of the Indigenous Foods cohort at Montana State University through Buffalo Nations. And this is a cohort of researchers from all across the campus, people in all different silos and departments of research and education, and like people doing buffalo manure composting and soil science revitalization and like food system work, buffalo certificate creation, Blackfeet buffalo certificate creation, which is pretty epic, and just, you know, people who are trying to do work in a good way, trying to do research in a good way, and trying to do it in a way that their ancestors would have done it. And to be a part of that, to cook for all of those people, to be a part of harvesting corn and learning how to process buffalo and learning how to honor the lands that I'm on in Montana and learn about the culture there through food has taught me so much more than any textbook will ever teach me, I can tell you that. But it also has created a place where we can go and be in community with one another and talk about what it means to be Indigenous, talk about what it means to be not Native enough to work with our communities, to feel, you know, also that to share stories about going home and learning how to pray for the food in our native languages and sharing that with one another, and just kind of creating community within an institution and moving forward out of that community in a good way, and how healing that has been for me personally. I mean, I can't speak for everyone there, but to cook for everyone and to share a meal with everyone and to talk about what they're doing and share and be reciprocal has been such a powerful experience. And so I talked with my advisor, and she was like, yeah, this process becomes us. It reflects us. This is something that is adaptable to any community because our ancestors were already doing it. And it's just a way of creating a common place to work forward from. And I think that that's really important when we're doing research and when we're doing science. And so these are a couple of the reflections that I have had after doing all of these feast tables. And actually, I don't know, I like to tell stories through food. So like, this is all of us Okay, I don't know how you feel about fry bread, but it's it's an undeniable part of Plains people culture. And so we were all making fry bread. We had some buffalo tacos. This is for the PhD cohort. Also had a feast table. It was a little bit of a different experience, but it was still a feast table, and we all became ohana. We all became beloved community, and it was important. And so. These are a couple of things. This is some, let's see, squash. There's some chokecherry buffalo stew. There's some sourdough. People are really into sourdough. So I'm thinking about this as a process right now, and just like how can it be something that cultivates and flows from an Indigenous epistemology and Indigenous worldview, that everything stems from the land, and that you have to go to the land first before you are in community and before you are trying to solve problems. And so I've reflected on how collecting those ingredients, preparing those foods in a way that honors your ancestors and invites them to the table to be with you, and the way that it honors the more than human relatives of those lands and the beloved community that you build around that table. And I've also thought about, in Indigenous research, we talk about all of these R's. There's a lot of R's for some reason. There's reciprocity, there's respect, there's responsibility, there's relationality, there's reverence. And I've been thinking about how this process of growing corn, being on the plains and learning how to process corn and gathering and processing and preserving corn and then sharing and redistributing that corn and then always praying and giving thanks. We're sitting in the middle of the university and all praying, and my advisor is smudging, and we're offering a spirit plate, and we're giving thanks for that food and for that community that we're in. And I just think a lot about how food cultivates all of these R's immediately. You don't even really have to work at it. And that's the wisdom of our ancestors right there. So those are just some of the reflections on the process as it is now at Montana State. But one of the firm building blocks that I believe in from this process and that I brought coming from Hawaii and learning from community and elders there is this concept of building a beloved community. And this was a teaching given to me by Auntie Puanani Burgess. She was this little Kanaka Maoli woman, and she was like a lawyer, and she calls herself the Dragon, and she was just like really involved in trying to create community, beloved community within her community in Waianae on Oahu. And so she shared a lot about what this process was for her and how it healed her and her community. And she starts with this exercise called Guts on the Table, which we did at the first Indigenous Foods cohort. And it's telling these stories. It's telling stories to one another, which is another wisdom from our ancestors. Shocker. And it's these stories of tell me the story of your name, tell me the story of your community, tell me the story of your gifts. And this is sharing stories with people, sharing breath with people. That is sacred ceremony, and she talks about that a lot. She says this isn't an icebreaker. This is ceremony. To be and share breath with people is something more important than we think about it right now. And so this is the start for us, for the Indigenous Foods cohort of our feast table, was building a beloved community first. And so another story, following up on Auntie Pua's wisdom about the beloved community, is coming out of that one of the first foods cohort meetings that we did. We talked about the story of our gifts, and one of my Lakota friends, who is like a young elder most of the time and then also kind of deranged, but I love her. She said, it's important to reflect on our gifts because our ancestors prayed for someone like us to be here. They saw what we might be facing and what was coming, and they prayed for us. And so I think about that a lot. And it also kind of leads into my other story of that building a beloved community process came from learning from an elder in Hawaii. And I was talking with my advisor about that, and she was like, you should go back to her and talk to her about this process, and maybe she can be on your committee, and like just talk to her and reach out to her. And I was looking for her, and I found out that she had passed away 2 days after we started building our own beloved community at Montana State. And I just remember sitting with that for a moment and just think, I'm not Hawaiian. I'm not going to pretend that it's my job to carry on her legacy, but even in just some small way to build beloved community in her memory. And I don't know, it bolstered me a little bit. And also, my ancestors are praying for me, and they prayed for me, and they're with me as well. So this is just kind of wrapping it all up a little bit. I'm thinking about what it means to build beloved community around the feast table as, I don't know, I'm calling it a research methodology for lack of better words, like a methodology, axiology, epistemology. This is a Western paradigm for doing research. And so there's maybe other words, better ways to do research that I don't know of, that we haven't quite come to yet when we're considering doing research. But I'm also thinking about it as just a process of leading up to ceremony. Feasting was a lead up to ceremony. Everyone gathering together to share food from their lands is a lead up to ceremony, if not ceremony in its own right. And so this development of the beloved community around the feast table grounds us in an Indigenous epistemology that might be more cross-cultural than is maybe we want it to be. Like, we want this to be in our own communities, on our own epistemology, but in this world, like, there's Indigenous students coming from all over the place. And so when we're building a beloved community, we have different epistemologies merging, and the only thing you can do is share those and come to a common understanding, a common leveled ground. And we're, if nothing else, remembering the land and our ancestors. And this, I've found, allows us to move forward in a good way. And I can't tell you how impactful it is to me to be in a beloved community around my feast table, and to know that if I want to come up with a question and an answer, I have a place to do that already. Like, it's really hard to feel like that right now. And it's my beloved community, and it's my feast table. And this is where good research could happen and should happen. And so I've been thinking about that, about how to make it into a process that other communities can do, that I can bring home to my own community and do. And also reflecting on it's stemming from an Indigenous epistemology. It's allowing us to pray, to have reverence, to give thanks, to bring our ancestors with us, and to move forward with intentionality to approach the work before us, to approach the problems that we're facing. Because we all need to work together to approach some of the problems that we're facing right now. I know all of you food system people know that, which I also consider myself a food system people, so there's that. But it just creates a space for those R's, for being reciprocal, for sharing that knowledge, for sharing that food, for honoring the food that we've collected from the lands that we're on in a good way. It's creating a space to be relational, to be respectful, to redistribute that knowledge through food and through words and through relationship and resources. And just, I don't know, it creates a space for all of those things. I think there's something really powerful about that. And so I'm opening it up for some considerations and questions, maybe how you've feasted with your beloved community in your life and what that means to you, or questions. And also, I have some from the Indigenous Foods cohort, my beloved community of the Indigenous Foods cohort at Montana State, some papa, which is dried buffalo meat. That's Lakota for dried buffalo meat, and this is like a life force for the Lakota people. Like this means everything. This dried buffalo meat. This is from North Bridger bison. This was created in community, and so I'm going to pass some around to all of you to create my own feast table here, and I ask that you give thanks. This buffalo gave its life to nourish you, and people created this food for you, and there's something really beautiful about that. There's something that everyone can learn from that wisdom of our ancestors, to give thanks and honor the life that we use as humans. And we need to gain wisdom from that, I think, in a good way. And so yeah, questions, and I'll pass around some papa.
So this is Taryn Williamson. She said, "This is wonderful. I'm Blackfeet member, currently living in Butte, Montana. I'm also a USDA scholar and work at an urban Indian organization." She works as a registered dietitian and shares meals and stories at our events to keep our culture alive in an urban setting.
That's awesome. Yeah. And let's see. I don't know what the best way is to pass this.
Let's use the mic for folks on
Do
Zoom.
any of you want some buffalo meat? Are you vegetarians? That was my concern. Yeah, go ahead.
Mahalo, Stella, for that presentation. I was just in Waipahu, so yeah. Just a really quick question for you. One of the quotes in your presentation, "The process becomes us and the process reflects us." As a researcher in your program right now, how are you navigating, preserving traditional practices and, process, and also having, methodology and, with the current AI and the use of that? How are you, processing that thought? And also, I mean, I saw your photos, right? And so we have this gathering at a feast table, but I also see in that photo, we have like the gold flour, making the fry bread. And so there's, an evolution through the process of the feast table. So in your own research, how are you navigating and how are you pivoting in such a way that you're preserving traditional, processes and practices, but also in your own research methodologies?
Well, this is my concern for, like, if you write about something and make it into steps that people can follow and like publish it, and like that's kind of a Western way to do research. And so are you preserving the spirit of something like this that's just done in community? Yeah, it's something that I'm thinking about a lot. I don't know how to make this into a process that other people can do while preserving it as an Indigenous, like something about there you can't really share information right now in this world that we live in an Indigenous way, because knowledge was shared in just your community. So how do we do that? I don't know. How do we maintain fidelity to the knowledge while also helping other communities and people to do something like this? AI, I don't know. There's no AI around the feast table. That was one of the rules in another feast table group that we did, is no phones, no butts on the table, no hats on the table. There's a lot of stories of feast tables that I'm not sharing because I consider this knowledge to have come from within beloved communities, to be co-created within those communities. And so who am I to share that knowledge? I asked for consent to share about our Indigenous foods cohort, and they gave you buffalo. So, and they said, yes, please share. We don't really think that you should make it a methodology because methodologies are too Western, but they're not sold on this being a methodology. They're just like, my friends said that we're literally just eating together. So don't make it that big of of a deal. But I think it is a big deal. I think to be in a space with other Indigenous students and to feel happy and healthy and whole and honoring and bringing our ancestors to the table is a big deal. And I think that's how research should, I think that's where it should stem from and come from. And that's how it did, that's where it did stem from. And so, yeah, go ahead.